Boy, that escalated quickly. I mean, that really got out of hand fast.
It jumped up a notch.
It did, didn't it?
Well, good afternoon. Happy Friday. Mark Milam here, your mortgage professional with Highland Mortgage, coming to you with this week's interest rate summary and market update. Boy, that did escalate quickly, didn't it? Not a great week for mortgage-backed securities in light of the inflation numbers that came out yesterday. As you probably read or heard, mortgage-backed securities took it on the chin. Mortgage interest rates are headed higher as a result. What really happened? Well, this is the Consumer Price Index, the CPI, and the CPI came in a little hotter than expected. It was anticipated to be somewhere in the 7.3% range, came in at 7.5%. It's honestly not that huge of a miss. The core CPI number, the core CPI strips out food and energy prices, and it's just basically what consumers are paying for a given basket of goods without including food and energy, which can be volatile. The core CPI just missed by 0.1%. So you might be thinking, why this huge sell-off in mortgage-backed securities? Why are interest rates screaming higher when we really just missed the core inflation estimate by 0.1%? Let me flip the screen around, and I'm going to take the long way to get you an answer to that question. So this is an article here on Yahoo Finance. I'm sure you guys have seen something like this. U.S. mortgage rates surge to the highest level in more than 2 years. Some people are saying it's taken us all the way back to 2018, but certainly at least back to the very, very beginnings of 2020 and maybe late 2019. Here's what happened in the world of mortgage-backed securities. This is yesterday, one of the biggest movement days I've seen in my career, the 16, 17 years I've been doing this. It was a huge sell-off in mortgage-backed securities, which means interest rates were headed sharply higher. You can see this entire week has not been too terribly kind to us, all the way from the 7th, 8th, 9th, there's the 10th, and here's today, the 11th, still selling off, meaning interest rates continue to head higher. Why, though, if the miss was only 0.1% difference, let me scroll down here and show you. The core CPI estimate was 5.9%. We came in at 6%. So why with just a tenth of a percentage are we selling off in this dramatic fashion and seeing interest rates head higher? Well, it has a lot to do with this gentleman right here. This is the St. Louis Federal Reserve President, James Bullard, and after the data was reported, he came out in an unscheduled session and said, in a very hawkish tone, said that he wants, and we can read it right here, he wants a full percentage point interest rate hike with the Fed funds rate over the next 3 central bank policy meetings. That is a huge statement to make, and candidly, a pretty irresponsible one as well. It completely roiled the markets, which had stabilized after the hot inflation number came in the morning. It completely roiled the markets, caused another huge sell-off for bond traders. This is the first time bond traders had heard anything about a full percentage point rate hike to the Fed funds rate over the next 3 meetings. That would be somewhat unprecedented. If you take a look at the next 3 meetings, here's the calendar right here. We've got one in the middle of March, we've got one in May, and we've got one in June. So what Bullard is saying is that by the middle point of June, he wants a full 1% increase in the Fed funds rate. That's somewhat shocking, and that's exactly what caused that big bond sell-off and puts us in the position where we are today. So a bit of a surprise. So it's not all really data related, it's sentiment related by a member of the Fed who decided to come out and make a statement like he made yesterday. And most people who are in the know seem to feel like that was a relatively irresponsible thing to do. It is what it is. The cat's out of the bag, the cow's out of the barn, as they say. So what comes next? Well, the entire reason all of this is happening is because of inflation, right? If you've been watching this series, which we put out every single Friday, you've heard me say this over and over and over again. The reason why mortgage interest rates are headed higher is because inflation is running really hot at over 300% of the Fed's target rate, which is 2%. And the Fed has to take some action. Bond traders are well out in front of this and understand that bonds are not a sexy buy right now because inflation erodes a fixed instrument's value over time. So if inflation is the problem, then what's the problem look like as the year wears on? This is where things get pretty interesting. Let's take a look at this inflation forecast. Now, this is from the OECD. This is a multinational, international organization. It's not affiliated with any given country or any given single institution that does inflation tracking, but also forecasting. And all of these gray lines here are the European Union. I'm going to strip this out because the line we care about right now is that purple line, which is the United States. So let me go in here. Let's take out everything but the United States and let's get a clean look at this. So here's a reading on inflation, that consumer price index going back all the way to Q4 of 2019. We can see we're right at the Fed's target rate of 2%. Pandemic hits, here we are in Q2 of 2020, and we see inflation down to 0. Q3, Q4 of 2020, obviously still very depressed because we're in the grips of the pandemic. In 2021, Q1 of last year, this is basically looking back 1 year ago today, we see an inflation reading of 1.9%. That's one of the reasons why inflation right now is reported so high, is because inflation is measured year over year. It's a 12-month cycle. So we're reporting on inflation that occurred in January, we're reporting in February on inflation that occurred in January, and we're comparing January 2022 against January 2021. And that's a pretty stark comparison. January 2021, very few people were vaccinated. The economy hadn't really opened back up in earnest. So it's an extremely different time period, albeit just a year ago. So that was 2021, Q1. Q2 here, 4.8% is inflation in Q2 of 2021. 5.3 in Q3, and in Q4 all the way up to 6.4%, and we know where we are now, right? We're in Q1 of 2022. We know inflation's in that 7 to 7.5% range. It's a big number, there's no doubt, but where are we moving forward? And this is where we get away from the data that we have into forecasting. And forecasting, always a bit of a tricky beast, but understand this, that inflation is reported year over year. So if we understand that throughout 2021, we saw inflation go from 1.9% to 4% to 5% to 6%, stands to reason if we're looking back year over year that as we get into Q2, Q3, Q4, that inflation number should start to come down a little bit. And that's exactly what we see on this forecast. Q2 of 2022 shows inflation dropping to 5.3%. In Q3, 4.3%. In Q4, down to 3.1%. That's just 1% higher than what the Fed's target rate is. And you can see on into 2023, we start to see inflation moderating right around where the Fed's target range is. All that to say, in the short run, things are just going to get worse as it pertains to mortgage interest rates. There's no denying that. There's not anybody in the industry who's in the know that would tell you we're about to see a sharp reversal in mortgage interest rates. We certainly are not. But as we progress through the year into Q2, Q3, Q4, you're going to start to see that inflation number moderate, and you're going to start to see interest rates begin to find their footing and perhaps settle back down a little bit to a more normal level. We're already actually at the level that most economists predicted we would finish 2022. We're already getting up into that very high 3%, low 4% range on the 30-year fixed. So a lot going on, a lot to unpack, not necessarily great news for homeowners, but hopefully that will give you some clarity around where we are, why we're here, and where we're headed. If I can be of any service to you, please don't hesitate to reach out, mark.milam@highlandmtg.com. Have a great weekend.